Welcome to this introduction to physically based rendering, also known as PBR. So, what is this? It is a method of shading and rendering that provides a more accurate representation of how light interacts with the surface. So, if you think about surfaces in the real world, such as wood, brick, maybe like a metal surface, light interacts with it in different ways. It will refract differently, say on like a bumpier, rougher surface compared to a very smooth one. Now, PBR shaders do all the heavy lifting. It will accurately calculate how light interacts with it in a game engine or in like a renderer, like say Blender or Marmoset. So, from an artistic point of view, the PBR workflow allows us to create more realistic looking assets that can work in different sort of lighting conditions. So from an artist point of view, we have to kind of create different texture maps that work within the PBR workflow. Now, in the games industry, we use something called the metallic roughness PBR workflow. There is the specular glossy one, but we don't have to worry about that because not a lot of game engines use that. Unreal, Unity, pretty much most of them will use this. So the PBR shader can be broken down into pretty much three core texture maps: your base color, also known as the albedo map, roughness, and the metallic map. Now, there are other texture maps that can work in conjunction with these. So you have, like, say, ambient occlusion, normal, and height maps. Now, these can work with both the metallic roughness and the specular glossiness. I will be talking about these in a separate video, but right now we're just fully focusing on the metallic roughness workflow. So here is an example of a couple of surfaces that have the PBR textures applied to them. So we have this sort of tiled floor and this more metallic one here. So I'm going to break down what each of these texture maps does. So I'm just going to shading really quick just to kind of break it down. So we have the base color, which is this image here. I also have it in Photoshop. So the base color is essentially the surface material on your model. So it could be like, say, wood, brick, whatever it may be, like fabric, for instance. That is what the base color albedo map does. It's just the surface of the material. Now, it's important to note as well that with the base color, we want to make sure that it's devoid of as much light information as possible. So, for instance, if you take a photo of a wall or of a surface with your phone, you'll notice that depending on the time of day, depending on the lighting situation, you might get some shadows and some light kind of reflecting onto the surface itself. Now, with a base color map, we don't want any light information. We want it to be as just plain as possible. That's why it's just the color map, because the renderer, the game engine, that will kind of bring the surface to life with its own sort of lighting tools. And then we use the other maps on top of it to kind of help kind of refine the shape a little bit more. Next, we have the roughness map. Now, this map describes the sort of the surface irregularities and the kind of sort of like the small little kind of like dirt and grain that you might usually see on a surface. So depending on like any surface that you look at, maybe if you move your head around, different angles of lighting on it, you might sometimes see some dirt and grime, little scratches, maybe even like footprints or thumbprints, fingerprints on surfaces. That's what the roughness map does. It shows those little irregularities, those little surface details that you wouldn't necessarily see in the base color map. It only show up depending on the way the lighting hits it to show those little surface irregularities. Just to kind of show a quick example of this. So in Blender, I do have this roughness map applied in this PBR texture, just to show it as well in Photoshop. Let me turn this off for a sec. So a roughness map works in grayscale, so black and white. So if any part of the roughness map is black, that means that the surface is smooth. If it's white, then it's rough. So you can have the sort of the grays in between where it's kind of rough but not really. So for example, with this tile, obviously the tiles, if they're brand new, if you got them from B&Q, they're going to be really smooth marble tiles, for instance. So there's going to be no surface irregularities whatsoever. But if you put it into, like, say, a bathroom, for instance, the grout, that's a very rough surface. So that would be pretty much white. But I could, for example, add in some, say, footprints here. So making these on the roughness map, they'll show up on the model depending on the angle and the lighting that you see. So let me just go back into Blender and we can see how this looks. So right now you can't really see anything because it has the normal roughness map on it. It's very subtle, but as I move around, you can see there is a little bit of reflection going on. If you're in Blender, you'll see it yourself on the actual tile bit, but it's not coming through on the grout because it's a very rough surface. So I'm just going to go into shading really quick. I'm going to just load up my second version of this. I'm going to go back into modeling. And again, it's very subtle, but you can just about see it. Hopefully it's showing up in the video, but I can see the footprint kind of coming through. If I go to the front, it's a bit hard to see, but depending on the angle and the lighting, those little details do come up and it just adds that extra layer of realism to your model. And last, we have the metallic map. Now, this is pretty self-explanatory, but the metallic map essentially tells the shader what is and isn't metal. Like with the roughness map, it also works in grayscale, so black and white essentially. So black meaning that something is not metallic, and white meaning that it is raw metal. So you have to kind of look at sort of metallic objects and think, is this pure metal? So for instance, you might see like say like an industrial barrel, for instance, they're usually metallic, but it's usually painted. So you're not going to get like a raw metal coming through. Whereas like say if you've got like say like brass like handles or like copper pipes, for instance, that's usually kind of pure metal. That's pure metal. So you would want it to be more sort of white, for instance. So if you go back into Blender now, I have these two surfaces here. So this is the tiled surface here, and this is a metal plate surface. And you can see it is very shiny in comparison to the tiles. That's because this is a pure metal uh, plate. So let's have a look in Photoshop to see how it looks. So we have the metal base color texture map. So we've got the surface there. We have the roughness to say what is and isn't smooth. And then let's have a look at the metal map. And you can see here that it's just a pure white texture map. That's because it's just pure metal. So that's why it's really shiny. It's because it's just pure metal. So this isn't probably the best example to use, but I do have another one here in Blender as well. So we have this kind of more rougher sort of metal flooring, for instance. You can see it's got some paint on here as well. So let's have a look in Photoshop to see how this map looks. So let's start with the color map. So you can see here that we have some of the exposed metal. You can see it is quite grimy as well. So probably people have been walking over this for like ages. So it's got a bit of the dirt and grime in there. So it might not be like 100% white, just because some of that sort of microsurface details in the roughness might be coming through as well. So if you go into roughness, you can see there again, it is very rough. These parts here being, I think these are the exposed metal bits here, whereas the rest of it is painted. So you can see that it's not as smooth compared to the actual metallic elements there. And if you go to the metal map, you can see which parts are metal and which ones are not. So it's a bit hard to kind of tell, but if I go back here, so if we pay attention to say this section here, this is where the metal is exposed. Obviously, this is all painted here. So if you go back to the metal map, this section here is the exposed metal. So we're actually seeing that sort of metallic element come through, whereas these sections here in black, that's all the painted elements to it. So the parts that have been chipped away, that's exposed, so that is showing up as metal, and you can kind of see it here as well as I kind of move around. That's a bit more shinier in these areas because the metallic elements are kind of shining through, as well as having this sort of roughness on top of it as well. This kind of makes more of a much more realistic surface as well. So that's a breakdown of PBR. So we want you to kind of experiment with it. So we'll be having some activities where you're going to be creating your own roughness and metallic maps based on the lesson activity.